everyone, and welcome to our channel, the best place for all things sewing. My name is Jesselyn, and today I'm going to show you how to turn a Marbella Tank into a Marbella Bralette. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and let's dive in. The first step in this Marbella hack will be to make an original Marbella based on the pattern directions and just become comfortable with making the regular pattern before you jump into the hack. And you're also going to need a regular Marbella tank in order to base the measurements for the hack. So the first step after making the Marbella tank is to make the measurement based on your current Marbella. So you're going to want to measure from the shoulder seam over the fullest part of your bust down to where you're going to want the Marbella to end. And you may want to add 1 or 2 inches to account for seam allowances and for elastic. I marked my measurement that I took from the shoulder seam all the way down to where I want the Marbella Bralette to end. And from this measurement, you're going to want to find the center front down to that line and the measurements from the side and measure them from top to bottom and cut your pattern pieces accordingly. So now that I have my center measurements, I'm going to use that measurement to bring over to the pattern piece and cut this side of the pattern to match the center front. And you're going to do the same with the sides and cut your pattern. When you are making your adjustment to the pattern pieces, you may want to measure a different way. You could also measure by measuring where you want your bralette to end. And again, you're going to want to remember to add a couple inches to the edge of that to account for seam allowances and for elastic. So once you have that measurement all the way around while you're wearing your Marbella tank, you're going to want to note the side seam measurements on each side and your center back measurements, and you're going to want to match that up to what the pattern pieces are, and be sure that when you are matching up the front and the back pieces that the side seams are correct and the same length on both the front and the back piece. The center front might be a little bit different depending on your measurements, but the pattern pieces do need to match up so that your pattern will turn out correctly. When you're cutting your pattern pieces, you're going to need to remember that the center front piece is the part that goes on the fold when you're cutting out your fabric, and also that the side seams on each side match up to be the same size. So when you are matching up the front and back pattern pieces, when you have your fabric cut, you can test to be sure that it's correct, that the front and back pieces line up at the side seams. For the lace pattern piece, you just use your original pattern piece. There isn't a modification for this part of the pattern hack. You can use any option for lace in this pattern. I'm using option 1. The pattern instructions call for a lace that has at least 50% stretch. You can use a lace with a scalloped edge, like a galloon lace, or a lace that doesn't have a scalloped edge. But you just want to remember to line up the lace edge part of your pattern piece to where there's a 1/4 inch of the lace edge still showing on the end. And you're going to want to cut 1 regular pattern piece and 1 mirror image pattern piece. Now that you have your fabric pieces cut out from the modified pattern, you'll need to be sure you have an elastic. You can use up to a 1-inch elastic. You could use an elastic that you would put in a casing, or you could use a plush back elastic that you don't have to encase. The pattern suggests that you want to choose a fabric that has a good weight and a good recovery. I used an athletic fabric for this. You could also use a swim fabric. I know we're heading into summer, so that's another hack. You could hack this into a swim top, but you would want to make sure that you use a swim elastic if you decided to do that option as well. Now that all the pieces are cut out, we can start putting the pattern together. So we have option 1 with our 2 mirror images, and I've marked the pattern piece in the corresponding fabric pieces to where they need to overlap. So what you're going to do is overlap both of your lace pieces, and then you're going to sew a basting stitch to attach them. This portion of the pattern follows the same instructions for the tank top, so you can follow instructions for whichever lace option you choose, all the way up to the hemming portion of the pattern. Now that we're at the machine, we're going to baste the lace with a 1/4 inch seam, and I am using a different color thread so you could see what it looks like. Otherwise it would be difficult to see and follow along too. So we're just gonna baste the 2 pieces together, and even though this is a basting stitch, you are not really going to want to remove this so that the 2 pieces stay together. So now you have your lace back piece all sewed together. So now you can attach it to the back. Now that we have the basted lace piece together, we're going to attach it to the bottom piece. We're going to line up the sides, and you may want to clip as you go along, especially with this delicate lace. You want to make sure it doesn't move. And once you have it all clipped, we'll take it back over to the sewing machine and sew it across the top. We're back at the machine. Now we're going to attach the lace top to the bottom back piece, and you may want to start a little bit past the beginning of your edge in case your machine likes to eat the lace piece at the end, and at the end of the sewing you can turn it around and stitch it down at the edge. You're going to want to sew this at the 3/8 seam allowance that it says on the pattern piece, and sew all the way to the end. This is really stretchy, and you're going to want this to stretch when you're putting it on. So I'm using the triple stretch stitch. You could use a zigzag stitch, or you could serge this if you'd like. The lace piece is now attached to the bottom piece, and once that's complete, you're going to want to flip it over and fold down your seam here and sew it down so that it stays flat. You can sew it from the bottom side, or you can top stitch it. Just be sure to catch the bottom piece on the underside. Now you're going to be ready to sew down that seam, and you're just going to want to catch it, the edge here, just like you're hemming, but you're going to want to use a stretch stitch here as you go down the seam. And just so I can be sure to catch both lace and bottom piece, and so it doesn't bunch, I'm going to sew it from the underside. But if you're really confident with your top stitching, you can feel free to sew it from the top if you'd like. And again, you're going to want to use a stretch stitch here because you're going to want to be able to have the garment stretch as you're putting it on. So you're going to sew this down from the top all the way to the end, and then this portion of sewing the back will be complete. At this point, we are still following the directions for the Marbella tank. The back portion is completed, so we're going to add the top piece, right sides together. We're going to match up the shoulder seams for each side, and you're going to sew at a 3/8 seam allowance, and then sew down the side pieces at a 3/8 seam allowance. When I'm sewing the shoulder seam, I like to put the lace on top. That way it has a little bit of something underneath it so your fabric doesn't get eaten. So you're going to want to go ahead and sew that together at the 3/8 seam allowance. You can also serge this if you'd rather not use your sewing machine for that. And we're going to get the second shoulder seam. You just want to be sure they're lined up at the edges. And then we're going to move on to sewing the side seams. Now we're going to sew down the side seam, and you may have to stretch the pieces a little bit to fit. Your front piece may be a little bit longer because you don't have that seam from earlier pressed down from the front like you would on the back, but it shouldn't be a problem as long as they're not too different in sizes. And you're going to want to sew this down at a 3/8 seam allowance as well, and then you're going to repeat the same thing for the other side. And to reduce some of the bulk on the seam, you may want to use your serger for this option, but that's totally optional, and whichever preference you prefer between the machines is up to you. And now you're going to want to repeat that same step for the other side. Now that we've sewn together the side seams and the shoulder seams, the front and the back of the bralette are attached, and we're going to continue to follow the Marbella Tank instructions for one more step. You're going to want to turn this inside out and fold the edge of the armistice towards the wrong side, and you're going to want to do that also for the neckline. You're going to want to fold down 3/8 of an inch all the way around. The armistice and the neckline should now be folded down at the 3/8 of an inch mark, so you can go ahead and take it to the sewing machine and sew this down. I like to use a triple stretch stitch for this. This would just be something that you would use just like you would use for a hem. Now that you're back in the sewing machine, you're just going to want to sew down from the armistice and then go back and sew down the neckline. Now that you finish sewing around the armistice and around the neckline, you can see that the edge has a nice hemmed finish along the straps on the front side. And now it's time to move on to the elastic part. There are a few different elastic options that you can use. You could use a plush back elastic. One side is plush and one side is not. And when you're constructing that, you would put the edge of your elastic with the edge of the garment and you're going to sew along the top edge, and you would put the stretchy, not plush side down against the fabric edge, and you would sew it all the way around at the top, and then once you're finished, you would just fold it under so the elastic is on the underside, and you would just fold it down all the way around. You could also choose a thicker elastic. You would not want to have this type of elastic touching against your skin for the most comfort. You would want to create a casing for this one, so I'm going to show you how to do that option. Once you've decided which type of elastic you're going to use, either the regular elastic or the plush back elastic, you're going to want to measure them the same way. You're going to take your measurement for your elastic by wrapping the elastic piece underneath your underbust, and when you wrap it around your back, you're going to want to be sure it's flat and not twisted. You're going to want to pull it, but you're not going to want it too tight, and you're not going to want it too loose. I use the measurement where it sits comfortably, where it overlaps, and that's what I use when I'm cutting my elastic. When you're ready to create your elastic casing, you're going to want to turn your garment inside out and go around the edge with 1/4 of an inch, just a small fold, and then fold it over again. That way you have a nice smooth edge for your casing, and you're going to want to do that all the way around and sew that down. Now it does matter how far you sew your elastic casing over. You need to be sure it is wide enough so that you can thread your elastic through the casing when you're finished. So this is a 1 inch elastic, so you'd want to fold it over enough to where this can fit through. And you're going to want to do that all the way around, and then I'll show you how to thread the elastic through. There are a few different ways you can make your elastic casing. I prefer to thread my elastic through and just sew my elastic down on each end, but you may want to sew the elastic in. And if you want to do that method, then you're going to fold down your little 1/4 inch edge, and then before you sew it, add the elastic and then pull it as you go, sewing around the top, and then fold it under, and then you can sew it down along the other edge. If you're doing the regular casing method that I'm going to show you, you don't add the elastic until the casing is made. But you may want to check at certain points to make sure your elastic is going to fit, because once you sew the casing down, the elastic has to be able to go through the casing that you made. So you may want to check that at certain points before you sew by lining up your elastic to your casing that you have clipped down. Once you've decided which way you want to put the elastic casing together, then you're going to want to sew either with a zigzag stitch or with a triple stretch stitch, whichever you prefer. For the casing method that I like to use is you'll sew all the way around, leaving a little bit of a space. You may want to leave a couple inches of space so that you can thread your elastic through. And what I do is just put a safety pin on the edge of the elastic and then thread it all the way around. So you're going to take the end of the safety pin and you're going to thread it in through the space that you have left yourself when you sewed around the top, and you're just going to pull it through. And if you find you haven't left yourself enough space here, you can take the stitches out a little bit on the other side. When you finally get the elastic all the way around and it comes out the other side, Then you can tuck the tails in and overlap them, and then you're going to want to sew down your 1/4 inch edge on top and catch the elastic there where it overlaps. Now that you have completed your elastic casing, you have successfully packed the Marbella Tank into the Marbella Bralette. Don't forget to share all of your creations with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for watching.